November 1944. The Moselle Valley, in the cold northeast corner of France. The fog came down hard that morning, thick, gray, the kind that swallows sound and turns running men into gray shapes. One honest word before we begin, because on this channel, it matters. What you are about to hear is a story. The valley was real. The war was real. The thing at the center of it, wounded men shot where they lay, happened on ground like this more times than anyone cared to count. But the soldiers in this telling are ours. We made them, named them, and set them down in that fog to carry a true and ugly pattern. So when the dialogue comes, hear it for what it is, a dramatized reconstruction of the kind of moment that haunted this war. Hold that in your mind. Then let the story take you. Now, the fog. A patrol was pulling back from a skirmish near the village of Kerling-les-Chirques. 6 men, 2 of them wounded. One could not walk on his own. In our story, his name is Private Thomas Kellner, 21, from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and he was dragging Corporal Ray Foss through the mud when the shooting started again. It was not fire from some fresh position, it was the same enemy unit they had just broken contact with, and it was not aimed at the men still on their feet, it was aimed low, at Foss, at the ground beside him, at the other wounded man, Private Dennis Ware, lying 30 feet off, with a field dressing on his leg, and his hands open and empty and plain to see. Kellner went flat in the mud. He heard the shots. He heard Ware cry out once, then nothing. When the fog shifted 20 minutes later and the rest of the company came up, they found Ware dead, shot twice more after he was already down. Foss had a fresh wound in his shoulder and lived, barely. Picture the men standing over that body, working out the angles, because the angles are the whole point. This was not a stray burst gone wide in the murk. The rounds had come from a chosen position, aimed and patient, at men who were already finished with the war. The report went up the chain fast, regiment by nightfall, up the line by morning, and by the 3rd day it was on the desk of the general responsible for that stretch of the front, a hard, plain-spoken man we will call Major General Harlan Pierce, one of the senior commanders in Patton's 3rd Army. Pierce read it once and set it down. Then he read it again, slower. His aide, Captain Ned Brock, was a few feet away, and in our telling, he remembered it like this. The general did not raise his voice. He did not slam the desk. He sat with it a long moment, jaw set, eyes on the page. Then he said quietly, "Find out who gave that order." Before we go on, if you are new here, this is what we do. We tell the stories of the Second World War, the documented history and the dramatized ones built on it, and we always tell you which is which. This one is dramatized, and you will not have to guess. Subscribe so the next one finds you. And down in the comments, tell us where you are watching from and whether anyone in your family wore the uniform in that war. We read them, every one. The unit on the other side was a Volksgrenadier Division, worn down to the bone in the Moselle Sector, pressed hard by the American advance, short of everything, the men exhausted past the point where exhaustion explains much of anything. Because exhaustion did not explain what happened at Kerling. In our story, the officer holding that position was Hauptmann Ernst Vogler, 38, a career soldier who had fought in the East before the West chewed up what was left of him. He knew the Geneva Convention. He knew the laws of war the way every officer of his years knew them, in his bones. He gave the order anyway. His own men would be the ones to tell it. As the American patrol pulled back and the 2 wounded men lay exposed for a moment in the open, Vogler directed his soldiers to keep firing, not at the ones retreating, at the ones on the ground. One of his sergeants, a man named Brandt, said later that he hesitated, that Vogler repeated the order, that he obeyed. Private Dennis Ware died 40 feet short of cover, 19 years old, Memphis, Tennessee, 11 weeks in Europe. Here is the first thing we want to put to you, and think about it honestly before you answer. Brandt hesitated, and then he did it anyway. If that order had come down on you, in that fog, with that captain standing over you, what would you have done? We mean it. Tell us in the comments. Pierce did not just want a report filed, he wanted the man, and the man was still on the wrong side of the line. So the general's intelligence officer, Colonel Dale Whitcomb, went to work. They knew the unit, they knew the rough position, they knew the rank and the name. What they needed was to get Vogler across that line, alive and accountable. Whitcomb brought the picture himself. The Volksgrenadiers were being pushed back. Days, maybe a week, and their position would fold. When it did, Vogler would likely try to surrender or slip north toward the German interior. Pierce told him to flag the name. Every prisoner intake point in the sector was to get it. The name, the rank, the unit. If Vogler came in, he was to be cut out of the crowd at once and held. Then Pierce did the thing that, in our story, is the heart of all of it. He sat down and drafted a memo to the war crimes people, the judge advocate's office. He laid out what had happened at Curling. He wrote down the name Dennis Ware. He set out the circumstances of the killing, and he asked that a formal investigation be opened and the evidence preserved for whatever tribunal might one day exist to hear it. Sit with the date for a second. This is December 1944. The war is nowhere near over. War crimes tribunals are an argument being had in offices in London and Washington, a concept, not yet a courtroom. Most commanders were thinking about the next ridge, the next river, staying alive until spring. Pierce was thinking about a witness stand that did not exist yet. When Brock carried the memo over, the officer at the war crimes desk looked up and said the general must be serious about this one. Brock told him the general was serious about all of them, but yes, especially this one. The army pressed on through December, and then the whole front caught fire. On the 16th, the Germans came out of the Ardennes in the dark and the snow, and the Battle of the Bulge swallowed everything. Up north, Patton was swinging the entire Third Army around in a matter of days to drive for Bastogne, one of the boldest moves of the war, and it pulled men and trucks and attention away from everything else. But the flag, on Vogler's name, stayed up, quiet, patient, waiting in a stack of paper while the world burned around it. The Volksgrenadiers came apart through January. By the end of the month, their corner of the Moselle had collapsed for good. Men were surrendering in clumps, sometimes whole companies walking in under white rags. On the 4th of February 1945, at a prisoner processing point near Thionville, a Wehrmacht captain came in with 7 men. The sergeant working the line checked his papers and ran the name against the flagged list. Ernst Vogler. He pulled him out of the line on the spot. Inside 2 hours, the word was back at headquarters. Pierce got it at dinner. He set down his fork, wiped his mouth, and said, "Tell them I will be there in the morning." He reached the camp outside Thionville at 9. No entrance, no ceremony. He walked in wearing the same mud and gear as everyone else and went straight to the room where they were holding Vogler. Vogler stood when the general came in, thinner than his file photo, uniform worn through at the elbows, a man who had spent 3 months walking backward through a winter. The interpreter, Lieutenant Marcus Field, took his place at the side of the table. Pierce spoke in English, slow and let Field carry it across. I know what happened at Curling on the 14th of November. Vogler's face did not move. A 19-year-old American named Dennis Ware was on the ground, wounded, his hands where you could see them. You told your men to shoot him again. He died there. Nothing. I want to hear you say why. For a moment, the room held still. Then Vogler answered, in German, that it had been confused, that he could not account for every round in that fog, that his men had been firing at threats they perceived. Pierce listened to the translation and nodded once, slow. Confused, he repeated. He laid a folder on the table. Inside were the statements, including the one from Brandt, who had already been processed and talked, freely, the way frightened men talk when the running is finally over. Vogler's eyes went to the folder and stayed there. He knew exactly what it was. Your own men told us what you said, word for word, Pierce said. He did not shout, he did not threaten, he did not so much as touch the table. He just let the weight of it settle on the room. You wore the rank of an officer. You knew what that meant, and you used it to kill a wounded boy lying in the mud. He turned to Field. Tell him this exactly. He is going to be charged under the laws of war. This case is documented, witnessed, and filed. It is not going to disappear. It is going to follow him through every proceeding there is, until someone with the authority to sentence him reads it and does. Field translated. Vogler sat very still. And the boy's name, Pierce went on, goes into the record and stays there, so that whoever opens this file in 5 years or 50 knows exactly who Dennis Ware was and exactly what was done to him. He picked up the folder, tucked it under his arm, and went to the door. Then he stopped and turned back one last time. The fog, he said. There was no fog when your sergeant got the order. He told us that himself. And he walked out. In our story, Vogler was charged and handed to the war crimes investigators that spring, one case among hundreds in the wreckage of the war's last months. Brandt's testimony and 2 others from the unit became the spine of the record that Memo had fought to preserve. Vogler was convicted in 1947 and sentenced to 12 years. Dennis Ware was given the Purple Heart. The citation said, "Killed in action." His mother received it at home in Memphis, a year almost to the season after her son died in the mud outside a French village whose name she would never learn to say. Pierce never spoke of it again, not in letters, not in any diary, but the men who were in that room at Thionville remembered the part about the name, about putting Dennis Ware into the record so that no one could ever pretend it had not happened. Years later, one of them, Lieutenant Field, tried to put it into words for someone writing the history down. He did not want revenge the way people picture it, Field said. He did not want to watch the man suffer. What he wanted was for the record to exist. He wanted it to be impossible to pretend it had not happened. He wanted Dennis Ware's name to weigh something in the final accounting. That was the general's revenge. Not a bullet, a file, permanent, documented, and impossible to lose. Now here is the truth under the story, and you have earned it. Ernst Vogler and Dennis Ware never lived. We made them. But the pattern they carry was as real as anything in this war. Wounded men were killed where they lay, prisoners too, on every front by every army that fought. And after the guns went quiet, real investigators and real tribunals did go looking for the men who gave those orders. Sometimes they found them. Sometimes the file went cold and the name slipped away. The idea at the center of our story, that the most lasting weapon against an atrocity is the record of it, written down and refused the mercy of being forgotten, is not invented. It is the truest thing here. So we will leave you with the second question. A file, not a bullet. Was that enough? Tell us honestly in the comments. And tell us too where you were watching from and whether someone in your family stood in that war. Those names matter as much as any we put in a script. If you want more like this, the real history and the dramatized stories built on it, always labeled, never faked, subscribe. Because this war should not belong only to the people who already know its names.